It's time to take a ride on the Steelers Afternoon Drive with our co-hosts Alan Saunders and Zachary Smith.
Welcome into another episode of Steelers Afternoon Drive. I'm Zachary Smith. That's Alan Saunders. Special guest for us today. We got Shaun Bijani joining us. One for one on saying his name, I found out right before we started recording. Thanks for joining us, man. Really excited to have you.
Appreciate you. And like I said, I think you probably say it better than I do sometimes.
Man, I don't know about that, but Shaun, maybe give the people a little bit of a background as to your work and the reason that we're having you on this show.
Well, I cover the Houston Texans for the flagship radio station in Houston, Sports Radio 610 KILT. I've been doing it for 17 years now. It was in August. So haven't missed many training camps. It hadn't been my exclusive, full-time job over that time. I was a football coach for about a decade plus, but I've covered pretty much every training camp, every single Texans game. I know the team, the organization pretty well. And really all of Houston's sports. And so I'm just glad to be able to, drop a little knowledge maybe with you guys. I know there's a couple of moves that the two organizations have in common over the course of the last 48, 72 hours. So I'm looking forward to it.
Shaun, wait, before we get into anything else, we'll talk about that. But more important stuff here. How did you feel about that injury? That song is sick, right?
The intro?
The intro for the podcast, that song. What do you think of the song?
Oh, dude, I love the intro.
Great.
I'm digging it. Why? Is there a disparity between you guys?
No. We love it. We wanted a third party.
We mostly just talk about how much we like it, actually.
No, I think it jams, man. It's a good start. It creates a good vibe to the podcast. I'm all for it.
It's a Steelers vibe. We feel like we're a rock and roll kind of town. I don't know. I've never been to Houston. I'm actually very excited about making the trip down there. It'll be my first time being in Houston. Coming up here was at week 4. And I'm pretty stoked about that.
Well, hey, hit me up in the press box, okay?
Yeah,
and then maybe before you actually come into town, because a lot of people, of course, think we're just cow pastures and cowboy hats and the usual. It's highlighted in every movie that has anything to do with Texas. But I think you'll find it a little bit different when you come in. Now, we do embrace that, but it is definitely much more appealing than what most would make it out to be.
That's awesome. I think I actually have an extra day there too. Maybe I'm flying home Monday. I don't remember. So yeah, I'll be excited to check out some stuff. Maybe I'll hit you up. Let's get into these two moves though, involving kind of the Steelers and the Texans. Let's start with the trade. Kendrick Green going from Pittsburgh to Houston for a 6th round pick. I think from this side of the table, the reaction was they got that for that guy. I think there's probably more to it from the Houston side of things based on what I've been reading about the state of the offensive line over there. And another K Green, who seems like he's going to be missing some time. What do you feel like was the thing that stood out that they really wanted Kendrick Green for?
Well, we talked to General Manager Nick Caserio this morning, and he was asked specifically about what was so appealing about Kendrick Green. He was pretty, I'll say this, he was as forthright as he possibly could have been. I don't know. I haven't checked anything official. I haven't gotten an email from the organization to this point. But at the time that he spoke with the media, the trade was not yet official. There was still physicals and paperwork and stuff like that to be processed. So there was only so much that he was willing to say. I asked D'Amico Ryans about Kendrick Green specifically, along with Josh Jones, whom the Texans traded for a couple of days ago from the Arizona Cardinals. He answered the part about Jones, but completely just gave me the cold shoulder on Kendrick Green, and I think probably for the same reason. But what Nick Caserio did say is, they went back and they looked at their evaluations of Green ahead of the 2021 draft. They did extensive work on him. They liked a lot of his traits. That was mentioned by Nick Caserio. Good playing style, good testing numbers at the time. Noted that, he did play a lot as a rookie. And I know Ben Roethlisberger on a recent podcast made note of this, which I took it a little bit differently than a lot of people did, in terms of how Ben broke Kendrick Green down. And maybe we can get to that here in just a little bit, but just noted that he played a lot as a rookie and thought that he played a lot more competitive than most people think. And likes his inside flexibility. The Texans, it's interesting. They went into training camp with Scott Quessenberry running with the ones, then pivoted to Juice Scruggs when Quessenberry went down with the season-ending injury. Scruggs goes down after the first series in the Saints game, and so they go Jarrett Patterson at center, whom they drafted in the 6th round. So this is just really the tip of the iceberg when it comes to the problems that have ensued with the Texans' offensive line. They had a lot of interior flexibility. The one thing that I felt like they needed to address was the tackle position, because if, God forbid, anything happens to Laramie Tunsil, there is nobody that could step in and provide even a serviceable rep at the left tackle position. At least nobody you'd feel comfortable with protecting your franchise quarterback. And everybody knows that Titus Howard is in danger of maybe missing the first week. So Kendrick Green was just a very curious move. You give up a 6th round pick, albeit a future one in 2025. It just felt like, and you guys could tell me better than most, it felt like the Pittsburgh Steelers, after doing him a solid last year and keeping him active and having not played a game, right? Hell, they even experiment with him at the fullback position in recent weeks in training camp. It just felt like this dude was going to be on the chopping block 24 hours ago. Why you felt the need to, trade a 6th round pick when you're already number 2 on the wire to begin with was just really weird.
Yeah, I didn't really understand the need to make if it was like the trade, you move down 10 picks in the 6th round, or trading 6th round picks. I could have seen that. I think it's probably a bit of an overpayment. I will say this about Kendrick Green, and I think this is sort of what maybe Ben Roethlisberger was alluding to a little bit too. Like the Steelers, it was not necessarily like an indictment of Kendrick Green as much as it was an indictment of the Steelers, that they drafted this guy in the 3rd round who had played guard at college, and they were like, oh, we're going to take this slightly undersized athletic guard, move him to center, make him start as a rookie on what was supposed to be like Ben's last hurrah, last chance at a Super Bowl team. And he just never took to playing center. He didn't. He admitted last year that he didn't want to play center. He didn't want to do it. He wanted to be a guard. He felt like he was a guard. And so, I really thought Ben was kind of taking a shot at the Steelers there more than he was dumping on Kendrick Green, where he was like, this is the guy you stuck me with. Now he's a fullback. Like, come on, more so than it was that Kendrick Green is no good. I really think, and, the Steelers, they kept him around all last year. They moved him back to guard. And then this spring they went out and they still had Kevin Dotson and James Daniels, who were their starting guards last year. They went out and signed Isaac Seumalo and Nate Herbig, who were both starting guards last year. So then he was like 6th on the depth chart of guards. So they're like, oh, we'll try center again. It didn't work. I think I don't think that he's a lost cause as an NFL player. But that felt like a guy that probably, like you're saying, like would have been, I don't know, because they really don't have a backup center. Maybe they wouldn't have put him on waivers if they didn't get anything for him, but I think probably they would have.
I haven't heard anything official from the team. D'Amico didn't really speak into any specifics about Green. As I mentioned, you just gave me the cold shoulder when asked about him. But, Nick, the same way. I just basically had all the bullet points that he'd said about that. But Seth Payne, who hosts the morning show for Sports Radio 610 here in Houston, former really good defensive tackle for the Texans, Jaguars back in the day. He brought up an interesting point yesterday, or maybe it was this morning. I guess it had to be in regard to Green. Maybe he's just not that smash mouth type guard, or just lineman in general that the Steelers really like and maybe thought he could be. Maybe he's a better fit in Houston, given the zone blocking scheme. But then that sounds good. Why would you even pivot to, the last resort of giving this guy reps as a fullback? If you're not a smash mouth guy, fullback doesn't really seem like the obvious pivot there. So
he's like a weird combination of like, he's a really good athlete. And so I think that's why the fullback stuff made sense, right? Because he is like super athletic for an offensive lineman. If you look at, and I think Caserio mentioned it, if you look at his combine testing numbers, like it's impressive. Like you're like, oh, this is a big guy that can really move. And I think that's why they thought fullback would be a good thing. He actually looked great as a full. I'm not gonna lie. I mean, the Steelers don't use a fullback that much, so Like they weren't going to keep him just for that job. He was going to have to make the team as an offensive lineman, and that was going to be like a plus. But he looked great he looked better as a fullback than he ever had as an offensive lineman. He's a great big athlete who moves really well. I can remember, man, his rookie year, they ran a screen, and he was the lead blocker on the screen, and he outran Najee Harris down the field. Because they just completely fooled the defense, and he's running free. Like, there he goes. Like, he can run. So I think there's like that untapped athletic potential. At the same time, I just didn't think it was just to me about center, and that getting the balls, like the consistency of getting the ball snapped was the big thing. Like, it wasn't that he couldn't block. He played guard in the third preseason game. If you go back and look at some of that tape, I didn't think it was that bad. I thought it looked fine in that game. It was mostly just the fact that they really needed him to be a center, and he just could never get consistent in that area of the game.
You know what's interesting is offensive line evaluations, because the guy that the Texans signed this offseason, Michael Dieter, who's proven to be a starting level center, a starting level guard in this league for the Dolphins the last few years, that was looked upon as like, you know what, this is a really solid depth move if they draft a center, as they should, but he's not ready. Maybe this is a guy they look at to start the season with. Scott Quessenberry, like I'd mentioned, if he doesn't go down, I don't know when Bruce Scruggs, if ever, takes first team reps, but he was forced into that role. Now he too is hurt, but has looked really good. But I mentioned the part about, offensive line evaluations being a thing. It's Dieter stepped in and was pretty good. There was nothing like where you'd said, I don't know if this guy can do this job, especially with the franchise quarterback who you're going to start from day one and CJ Stroud back there. You want to put your quarterback in the best possible situation to be successful, which that's really what has struck a chord with a lot of fans around here, which is what has left a lot of media members scratching their heads. It clearly has not seemed the case. The translation from both D'Amico's and Nick Caserio's, podiums today was make it work. Figure it out, and you just got to make it work. Out of all of the bodies they brought in, heck, they cut most of them over the course of the last 24 hours, and it does not appear that they had a plan even back in May when they today admitted, to me, this was the story of the day from Houston, is Nick Caserio said it was not a question of if, but rather when this was going to happen with Kenyon Green with the shoulder. They knew he had a bad shoulder in May. They opted to let him work through it instead of surgery. And now he's slated to have surgery at some point in time this week, I believe, or over the course of the next 2 weeks. That to me is horrible planning, to just not planning at all for a guy that you envisioned clearly from day one was going to be starting at quarterback for you in CJ Stroud. You can't let that happen, especially when you spend $120 million guaranteed on 3 guys just within the last 4 or 5 months on that offensive line. And Titus Howard, who's maybe not going to start week 1, Laramie Tunsil, who is, and then, of course, Shaq Mason, who's maybe the one of only 2 guys you feel really, really good about that are actually slated to start on week 1 against Baltimore.
Yeah, the scheme stuff is interesting because I mentioned to Alan just yesterday when we were talking about this deal, like Bobby Slowick's offense. I feel like if there is one place where this is going to work for Kendrick Green, it is within that offensive scheme for them. So be interesting to see how that works out there.
It's going to be a wait and see approach. We haven't even seen. I don't even know if Josh Jones has a number, to be honest with you, down here yet. I checked him on the.
I saw a graphic just because of Kendrick's Instagram story, and it had Josh Jones as 72, but I don't know if that's accurate.
There you go. Maybe I need to check the Texans website once more. But I was looking at the 53 after all the cuts were made yesterday, and they just had a blank next to his name. But I say that because look, today they had their first practice with the initial 53. We saw a bunch of stretching. It's about all they show the media these days. I don't know if it's like that up there in Pittsburgh for you guys, but
we get the whole practice, but then we're not allowed to talk about it. So
I remember those days.
That's the both words.
I remember those days. I think we got a little bit of that under Gary Kubiak, and that's been a little bit ago. But ever since O'Brien came in, it's kind of like shut it down, shoot for 20, and then even if whatever you see there, don't talk about it.
Yeah. Let's move to Desmond King, who's a guy I think the Steelers fans are very excited to have. And, I kind of look at that Houston defense and I can't figure out why this guy doesn't have a spot, so fill me in. I mean, it looks like he was fairly productive last year in 2 different roles. Seems like he has some versatility. What led to him, not making this team, and why?
You hit it. I think that was the big head scratcher for everyone when Desmond King was announced as one of the cuts. The guy had been one of the most consistent members in the secondary. And mind you, when this team signed Jimmy Ward in the offseason, the news of Derek Stingley being used more, to accentuate his skill set as a man cover guy. The season that Jalen Petrie had been coming off of, Steven Nelson, which was an odd situation this offseason. If you guys are familiar with his back and forth.
We're very familiar with Steven Nelson.
Yeah, well, that's right. He got that fantastic contract years back from the Pittsburgh Steelers. And I really started to think like, man, you know what? This 30-year-old guy thinks he's going to get paid Steeler money again. I didn't think it was going to be the case, and he certainly didn't, but he did get a little bump in salary after calling his own general manager a mofo and talking about how he couldn't be trusted on social, which was really interesting. But I say all that because if there was one position group, guys, we felt like you could hang your hat on down here, it was the secondary. And I still think you for the most part should and can feel that way. But Desmond King was a big part of that. You mentioned the versatility. He started the first 9 weeks as the nickel corner primarily, but then once Derek Stingley went down with injury last year, he played a lot outside and was actually pretty good in that role. I think his Pro Football Focus grade ended up being around 70, 71, 72 at season's end. Pretty darn good for certainly that defense and everything they asked him to do at various positions last year. But I did hear, because I asked the question yesterday and again this morning to two different sources close to the situation, and they said that the reputation that preceded him just kind of lingered as maybe a guy that wasn't as responsible off of the football field, known more so as a partier. Didn't appreciate maybe the way that he'd shown up to some practices, last year. And I got to tell you, I was shocked, but to be honest with you, I figured it had to be something along those lines, to be quite honest with you, because from a football sense, the guy who he was in the locker room, extremely professional, very friendly with the media, carried himself in an utmost professional way on the football field. And ultimately what it's all about is results. And the guy provided that and then some for you. So I'll just tell you this, Pittsburgh's getting a heck of a football player. You guys should be definitely happy with that. I didn't check the depth chart or the quality of that position prior to the move. But if that guy's not on a football field, something's definitely wrong.
I think they've got former Vikes and Packers slot guy Shannon Sullivan sort of in pencil in the slot right now. But I think there's a very good chance that when the Steelers come to Houston, that Desmond King's going to be a starter for them. I really do.
I'd be surprised.
I think, and they have some. They really shook up their secondary. They have some plans where they brought in Patrick Peterson. They want to play him in the slot some, I think, in passing downs. And second-round pick Joey Porter Jr. would then come and fill in on the outside. But I think the rundown nickel, which is sort of like their base defense, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like what they play most of the time. I think King's probably going to be in that package as part of the regular rotation. It's interesting you said it was like kind of off the field stuff. I always feel like those kind of things often get revealed in surprising ways to people that are sort of outside looking in when a staff changes over, right? Where there'll be a guy who was kind of tolerated maybe because there was, got along with people in a different way. And then all of a sudden there's new people and certain behaviors are like, oh, well, that was okay when you were buddies with the coach, but now you're not, and it's not anymore. And I think those things come out in that way all the time.
Yeah, it is interesting when you put it that way. And I'm not going to say it's a complete parallel, but I think back to, years ago when the Texans drafted Jadeveon Clowney. When it came time to make that decision, to re-up him, to keep him, we know how his career turned out. I mean, he's kind of bounced around all over the place, on 1 and 2 year deals. He never got that real big one. If he had the opportunity to do so, it was going to be in Houston or maybe Seattle. But there was the concern, the rumblings, I'll say, of a concern that the influence that he'd had on some younger guys in that locker room wasn't exactly great in terms of what his lifestyle was like, maybe how loose he was off of the football field, so to speak. And so, that was a decision made then that kind of resonates with me now, when you look at these sort of things. And it does make sense. I get it. I think back to Brandon Cooks, who was a Jack Easterby guy. They were very tight. Obviously, the story. Jack Easterby was outed finally last year. We did everything but, throw a parade after that move. But there are guys that, maybe lingered. I don't know if he's one of them or not. I don't want to go that route, but Brandon Cooks was certainly one of them. And you mentioned the word tolerated. That's really kind of what the vibe was for me last year, is that they tolerated that. They knew exactly what was going to be the result of last year. Maybe not exactly. Thanks, Lovey. They wanted the number 1 overall pick. They got 2. But they knew they were tanking in each of the last couple of years, and they could tolerate some guys. And, this year, look, they turned the page. They're for real, and that's what's got the city. The vibe has changed. It's maybe as excited as we've ever been here in Houston for a football team, at least since 2017, when a guy named Deshaun Watson strolled in and just looked like a magician at quarterback. And you don't feel so bad about that now either, but that's where we are.
Anything else,
where
Zach?
we are. No, I'm good. Shaun, we took up a ton of your time, and we can't thank you for the time that you gave us. So appreciate you joining us. You can tell the people where they can find your work, and we'll get you out of here.
Absolutely. You can find me on Twitter at Shaun Bijani. Same thing on Instagram. I'm publishing work every day on sportsradio610.com. So if you want to follow anything and everything football, Texans, Astros, you can find me there. I really appreciate you guys having me on. Enjoyed it. And keep the intro song.
It's here to stay. We're actually,
sure
once we get to 10,000 subscribers, we're playing the full thing. So that's what the people are really waiting for.
There you go. There you go. You're on your way. Thank you, guys.
Yeah, absolutely, Shaun. Thanks for joining us. All right, so that was Shaun Bijani. Again, he told you where you could find his work. Go do that. Great conversation about Kendrick Green and also Desmond King coming in. Interesting that we didn't really even, it didn't even cross my mind until you said about him coming on. Kendrick Green going there, but Desmond King coming here. Obviously not both trades, but a lot of activity with the Texans and Steelers.
Yeah, I thought it just made sense, right? We're talking about maybe 2 of the biggest stories of the last 2 days. Let's get somebody on. I thought Shaun was great. Lots of good insight there. Curious that you kind of bring up Steven Nelson, right? And then he's talking about Desmond King kind of being this guy that maybe they were happy to be or okay to be rid of. Kind of get those vibes that's kind of the way the Steelers were about Steven Nelson too when he left. And it was yeah, all right, fine, go. Like that. That's it's interesting. It's interesting. One of the things that I think the Steelers have done a much better job of, and we've talked about this here, but I really do feel like they've nailed the culture of this team. It feels nailed. And so that's an interesting perspective on that. And we'll see how that plays out. I don't know that I have a take to add to that or an opinion, but I have felt like this is a very tight team. And it's Mike Tomlin's done a very good job of sort of layering the personalities together in a very intentional way. So we'll see how Desmond King fits into that. I think from an X's and O standpoint, he fits in extremely well on the football field.
Yeah. I was just curious looking into it. He is a Rosenhaus guy. I was curious who his agency was. So yeah. Obviously, I mean, everybody has connections to that agency. So, all right, what else do we got to get into today? Braden Mann, we talked about potentially something there gets released today. Do you think it was a case where they were holding out for a trade? That's why they kept him on there, but maybe a team that they had something wait and see ended up getting somebody from the waiver wire, or they just went a different direction, or what do you think was the reason there?
Yeah, I mean, my guess is they were waiting for waivers to go through. They thought that, there was a chance that it seemed like Philly was interested. Did they end up making a waiver claim? I didn't.
I didn't see anything regarding. No,
I didn't see one there. But maybe they, maybe Philly realized that there were no waiver claims, right? And so then those punters that were on waivers, Drew Chrisman and Corliss Waitman that we talked about yesterday, I do think the availability of those guys, maybe in a different way that we talk about the Kendrick Green trade, like there, you go look at the waivers, like the centers. Okay, 2 centers got claimed on waivers: Tristan Colon and Keith Ishmael, and I don't know who either of those guys are. And so, like, if you're
Tristan Cologne's from the Jets, right? Because I think
Yeah.
Nick might have brought him up.
He's
as a
from the
potential.
Jets. Yeah. Okay. But like, if you're talking about guys that like I don't even really know getting claimed on waivers, that means like, okay, like none of those guys were 3rd round picks, right? And we can debate whether or not Kendrick Green was a good 3rd round pick, but he was one. Okay, Tristan Colon was an undrafted free agent, right? So like, there's a big. There's certainly something to be said about the scarcity of good offensive linemen compared to what is apparently a glut of decent punters, despite a bunch of teams not having one, with guys like Chrisman and Waitman around. I think that's what killed any value the Steelers could have gotten out of Braden Mann. So instead of forcing him into limbo, they just let him go and I assume they're going to use that roster spot on King, although I've not still seen them announce that transaction. They probably will do it during the show, because that's just, when you're a beat writer, every time something happens that you're away from the keyboard for like more than 20 minutes at a time, that's when something happens. And so probably is happening as we speak right now.
When you said about Kendrick Green, you don't know if he's a good 3rd round pick. It popped in my head. When it comes to 3rd round picks, he's definitely one of them. Alan, we mentioned yesterday too that like a lot of the guys that we see cut could find their way back onto the practice squad within the next 24 hours anyway. We did see the Steelers add some guys back to the practice squad: Luke Barku, Braden Fajoko, Jonathan Marshall, David Perales, Greg Bell, Trenton Thompson, Rodney Williams, and Des Fitzpatrick. Also bringing in Anthony Brown, who spent a lot of time with the Cowboys, a veteran add to the group
too. So Braden Fajoko, I thought to me was the big got to get him back guy. And I think that's huge for them that he's back. In fact, like, he can play those 2 games as practice squad call-ups. Like, just save him for the Browns and the Ravens, right? Like that's kind of what it feels like. I'll make this prediction right now: Braden Fajoko plays at least 1 game for the Pittsburgh Steelers this season. Prediction.
I will second that. Yeah,
done. So I thought he was the one guy that was like really in date. It looks like Zach Gentry is going to find another opportunity somewhere else. Haven't heard anything about Trey Norwood. Not quite sure what's going on there. Tanner Muse got claimed on waivers by the Chargers. And I kind of thought, as an experienced special team guy, that there may be a team that would be interested in him. And they brought in a couple other guys. So a couple offensive linemen. Kellen Deesh, who was with the Bears, was an undrafted free agent out of Arizona State last year. Insane athlete, 6'7", 300, runs a 4.8 40. Is not strong enough. Like, needs built up. He's a project. We'll see. And then Joey Fisher, who I think is probably a guard at the NFL level, played tackle for Division II Shepherd. Shout out my PSAC guys. Love Shepherd. Well, actually, see, I can't say I love Shepherd because Shepherd beats IUP a lot. And I shouldn't like that, but I still got to root for their guys, like, to do well when they get to the NFL. And so when I was at the Senior Bowl, I sought out the Shepherd head coach, talked to him for a little bit, because Tyson Bagent, who made the Bears as their backup quarterback,
really nice preseason,
also from Shepherd. So they had 2 guys there at the Senior Bowl. That was really awesome. And Joey Fisher actually broke his thumb or his knuckle or something like that, so he couldn't play. But he was around, and so it's very cool. Total non sequitur. Tyson Bagent's dad was like a world champion arm wrestler. Now you know. Now you know. You didn't know. Now you know. I met him. I shook his hand. It was painful. That's
what am I going to do with that information? I have no idea, but I know now.
Now you know, right? Well, we need a little NBC.
Yeah, there you go. Maybe I'll add that graphic post show. But Anthony Brown's the one that stands out to me.
Anthony Brown to me is the news right here. 7-year vet, was the Cowboys' starting cornerback for the last 2 seasons. In fact, in 2021, he played in the Dallas secondary alongside DeMonte KZ and Keanu Neal. I think he can do that. And he was awesome that year. Let me read you his statistics from 2021, because it is quite good. It is, I mean, it's sort of tantalizing to think about what could be, because Okay, 2021, 16 starts in 16 games, 3 interceptions, 17 passes defended, and 59 tackles. That's pretty solid year of work for an outside corner. He did have an Achilles injury last year. He has not been with a team since. So, I think the Cowboys had they cut him, because he wasn't going to be healthy in time for OTAs and all that. And he hasn't been with any other team. So kind of a shot in the dark about how healthy he is, how ready he is to play. Probably healthy because he had to clear, a physical to get onto the practice squad. But in terms of readiness to play, seems like not maybe. But you get a guy who was a starting cornerback for the last 5 or 6 years in the NFL and a pretty good one for nothing for a practice squad spot. And so it looks like there's potential additions to depth at both cornerback spots when you add Desmond King to the slot and Anthony Brown to the outside. Man, Omar's having a good week, isn't he? Can we say that?
Yeah.
It's a good week.
It's funny. So somebody literally must have jumped onto YouTube and just had the itch to comment about Anthony Brown because Berg Sports Fan, I feel like I'm seeing this name a lot in the YouTube comments recently, commented on the video from yesterday because they asked something about James Pierre, and they said now with Anthony Brown on the practice squad, could he push to take over for James Pierre at some point?
Yes, absolutely. I think that is very reasonable, that this is better competition for James Pierre for that spot than we had in the preseason. I think I said when we talked about the cuts, I didn't think James Pierre was very good, but I didn't think anybody else was better, right? This is somebody that has the ability to be better. And so if he can, if he's healthy and he shows that ability to be better, then yeah, I could see this, probably not week 1, right? I mean, the guy hasn't been playing, so it's going to be a little bit, but this is a potential mid-season, we could see them make that switch, I think, and bring him up to the active roster if they're still not getting what they want to get out of James Pierre. And then, of course, also, if there's an injury, right? I mean, that's usually the way things go, is that we make all these plans for the season and then they're gone first half of the first week because something happens. Actually, it was in the third quarter last year or the first week that something happened. Let's not talk about that.
Yeah. Also, Jamie back again, and this one is above my pay grade, Alan. So, and honestly, I might do a very poor job of asking this because this question was kind of all over the place. So first off, excellent explanation of the 16-man practice squad situation in today's NFL, how much ramification they receive, and more. I have noticed some articles attempting to explain 55 men classified verse 53. Maybe y'all can help us out and explain this 55. I know there's more to that 16 as well. They get split. 4 are allowed to be a certain amount of years experience.
Yes. So the 55-man roster was a COVID thing. It's back to 53. Okay, so we can forget about 55.
Yeah. Okay, that makes sense now because I was I didn't know where that was coming from.
So we did have a couple of years of 55-man roster, but that is gone now. And then the veterans on the practice squad. And so you can have up to, I believe it's 3, or is it 4? It's 16 players total for the practice squad. And I think you can have 4 players that are classified as veterans. So 4 years and beyond of NFL experience. And so I'm sorry, it's 6. 6.
Yeah. I was
so they changed it. So it's 6. It's 6 players with more than 2 accrued seasons. So players in there. So the NFL kind of goes back and forth about what really is a veteran. It depends on what you're talking about. Sometimes you're a veteran if you're in your 4th year. Sometimes you're a veteran if you've completed 4 years. So now it's if you have no more than 2 accrued seasons. So if you're in your 3rd year, a 3rd NFL season, then you count against the veteran maximum, but there's 6. So I believe Brown would be the only Steelers player of that group that would count. So they've signed, they announced 9. They did not announce Deesh. They did not announce Fisher. So that would be 11. So they've announced 11 of the 16. There's only 1 vet. So they could bring in some more if they want them. Nick Kwiatkowski, I believe, is around. I would make that prediction if I were predicting who was making the practice squad, but I'm not. But I think he might. I guess I am if I'm saying it right here, right now. I think Nick Kwiatkowski will be on the practice squad tomorrow, but we'll see.
Last thing we'll leave with this. Somebody mentioned, and you just mentioned, that you think Zach Gentry ends up finding work elsewhere at this point. They did bring Ronnie Williams back on the practice squad. This person commented, just letters is their name, XABGX. I mean, I'd love to give you a shout out, but that's all I got here to work with. They think that Gentry should definitely have stayed on the roster or at least be brought back on the practice squad. With Darnell Washington's injury history and being the reason that he fell in the draft, Zach Gentry would be nice insurance to have around.
Darnell Washington had injury history, and that's why he fell in the draft. Pat Freiermuth has a very troubling concussion history, and Connor Hayward is the wrong size to be an everyday tight end. I do think there is a legitimate concern, but I think Rodney Williams making it to the practice squad alleviates a lot of that concern, because Rodney Williams is if I'm being perfectly honest, a better one-to-one backup for Pat Freiermuth than Zach Gentry is. Now, Gentry would be a better replacement for Darnell Washington, but look, you can only have replacements for so many guys. You have 53 different players. You have 40 different body types. You can't have backups from all. So I think prioritizing a guy that could be an every down tight end in Rodney and Hot Rod, I think makes sense compared to Gentry. I would have fit them all, though. I think that Gentry's experience, his special teams play, his blocking would be useful. I would have tried to find a way to make it work. I understand why they didn't. I think I'd have kept him over Miles Boykin or Gunnar Olszewski. I think he's a better player than both of them. And I think he also plays special teams. But it didn't work out that way. I do think he will find an opportunity elsewhere. This is a guy who was the Steelers' number 2 tight end the last 2 years. Like, he's going to get a job. Like, there's no doubt in my mind.
Absolutely. All right, Alan. I think that about does it. Again, thanks to Shaun Bijani for joining the show. Alan,
that was
tell
awesome.
people where they can find you.
At @Saunders_PGH on Twitter, at PGH Steelers Now is the site on Twitter and on YouTube, which is where this show lives. Leave a comment, like, and subscribe. SteelersNow.com is where the words go. Go there, read them. I get paid.
And there's a lot of words.
Derek Bell, they're all there too.
And there's a lot of words there to be read.
We're filling the internet with words every day. That is our goal.
I am Zachary Smith, PGH. I hear at some point in the future at Carter Critiques will be joining the show, but that's not today. So sorry, Carter.
We had a guest
on before. Yeah, we had
a guest.
Listen, obviously, the two of us every single day. Nick's been on here a few times. Derek's been on here a couple times. Now Shaun Bijani's been on here. Carter's probably getting impatient, but keep waiting, pal.
It's a good tease. We'll just keep teasing until it happens.
It's never actually going to happen.
Everybody's just going to log on and be like, "Is today? No. It's today? No." Maybe
keep waiting.
No. Yeah.
All right, but again, like Alan said, subscribe, leave us a like, hit the notification bell, comment down below, leave us a 5-star review if you're listening somewhere else. For Alan, I'm Zach. We'll talk to you next time. Bye-bye.